event is organized by Fintech Convergence Council and Payments Council of India of the Internet Mobile Association of India. Joining me here from Manila, Philippines is Mr. Mikko Perez, founder and CEO of Ayannah. Ladies and gentlemen, this would be a leadership talk. And without wasting much time, let me introduce you to the stage, Mr. Perez. Over to you, Mr. Perez. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uday. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here in this Global FinTech Conference. It's exciting to be part of this global event. And calling in from Manila just goes to show how global FinTech has become, particularly in the last 18 months because of the pandemic. So again, my name's Mikko Perez. I'm the founder and chairman and CEO of Ayannah. We are a fintech company that focuses on providing affordable and digital financial services through digital technology, particularly kids. I'll tell you a little bit about Ayannah, the journey of Ayannah, a little bit about my own personal journey, and then sort of leadership lessons from my experience building Ayannah in the past several years. So again, Ayannah, we're a fintech company focusing on digitizing financial services and commerce, focusing on emerging markets. We started in the Philippines, and in many ways, Philippines, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, many parts of Latin America, as well as Africa, are what you would consider emerging markets. And in these emerging markets, there's been very much, when we first started Ayannah, it was still very much a cash-based economy, but and 100 cash and financial services were very inaccessible, particularly to the broad segment of the population. So what we decided to do was focus on building financial services that were both, how would you say, physical and digital. In the early days, we focused on building agent-based financial services, what you would probably call in India's correspondent banking. Here we call it a sort of branchless banking. And of course now, because of the pandemic, there are elements of what you call embedded finance or open finance that is part of this. But if you look at it, it's basically we are building platforms that digitize existing financial services, let's say remittance, payments, lending, credit scoring, insurance, brokerage, securities brokerage, and asset management, and putting them on digital platforms. And all of this has been made possible primarily because of the advent of the smartphone, the Android handset in particular. Over the past few years, the Android handset has become pervasive. So as you probably know, more people around the world use Android now than any other handset. And so this has been sort of the primary sort of device that allows people to access the internet and to access financial services and to do things and to perform transactions and commerce. Now, we started out in the Philippines. So Philippines is a bit like India, but on a much smaller scale. But what one thing the Philippines has in common with India is that we have a very large cross-border remittance market. We have around 12 million Filipinos living overseas in our diaspora, and they send around $34 billion back to the Philippines every year. And even during the pandemic, that amount has not really decreased substantially. So a big chunk of our GDP is still dependent on inward remittance from our foreign workers. To a certain extent, India is probably also a big sort of recipient of inward remittance. I believe there's around 70 million Indians around 50 million Indians, I think you call them non-resident Indians, that are living overseas, who send annually around $70 billion, roughly half of what the Philippines is receiving from our overseas diaspora. So we started there because that's sort of where, when we first started, remittance was quite expensive. and very inconvenient for the foreign worker. I think when we first started, it was around 12% of principal amount. Then over time, because of technology and market forces, that's gone down to 7% on average globally, but it's still very much cash based. But I think because of the pandemic, that's actually the cost as a percentage of principal has actually gone down further to around maybe 3 or 4%. And I think that's going to be it's a race to zero in that sense. So we built platforms to allow that, and then also domestically, uh, in the Philippines, there's a substantial domestic remittance market. A lot of people have moved from the countryside to the cities to find work, but they still send money back to their families in the countryside to support their daily needs, and that's an even bigger funds flow than our inbound volume. So we estimate our funds flow from the city to the countryside to be around closer to 40 to $50 billion a year, and this is basically cash remittance. As of 2019, and I think probably until 2020, our monetary authority estimates that a full 90% of those cash remittances are still very much sent in cash and received in cash through networks of remittance agents. Obviously, with the pandemic, there's been some increase in adoption of digital technology, particularly on the origination side, on the sending side, because of the rising popularity of electronic wallets, which kind of mirrors the experience of India, if I'm not mistaken. So, sometime in 2017 or 2016, when your monetary authority demonetized the rupee, there was a big adoption of the mobile wallets in India, and and it's the same thing in Indonesia and other parts of other emerging markets as well. So that's a trend line of going digital, on particularly on the origination side. On the receiving side, though, it's still very much a cash-based user experience, and so we still support our what we call our agent network in the countryside. They're the ones dispensing the cash to the beneficiaries. Uh, and but because of the growth of digital of adoption of digital technology, because of the mobile internet infrastructure and the ubiquity of mobile devices, we're now also supporting digital apps that are focusing primarily on the consumer. So one example of this would be we launched a credit scoring platform that allows people to sort of access loans through an online platform, and using their sort of top up data or their bills payment data or their remittance data to sort of give them a credit score or a profile of their behavior. So that's one of the things we launched in Indonesia. We're also building platforms to allow cooperatives in Indonesia and the Philippines to serve their members digitally instead of face to face. So those are the things that we're doing that sort of that's been accelerated because of the pandemic, and so it's an exciting time for us. And our goal really is to provide the whole sort of breadth of financial services that can help improve the lives of our users. So we started out, of course, with remittance and payments. Now we're digitizing loans and lending as a service. We're also looking at insurance. Then we're also looking at asset management and brokerage. So all of these things are happening. And some are happening faster than the others, but it's all sort of in the general direction. And I think we're part of a once in a and for all event when all of this is being digitized. So it's an exciting time for us as a company, and I'm sure it's the same thing in Indonesia. That's why we're in this conference, as well in India as well. So exciting time. So a little bit about me. So, I grew up in the Philippines. I went to school here, but I went in university here. I graduated with a degree in management. I also, but in my first few years of my career, I actually worked as a community organizer or a social development worker in rural Philippines. Sort of my giving back service to my country, and in that actually was a quite a what a formative experience for me because I learned a lot about the problems of everyday people, particularly the poorest of the poor. And I said, if we can serve this bottom of the pyramid or this emerging middle class, I think it would be a wonderful way to sort of be in business, not just to make profit, but also to serve a purpose and make impact. So that was so many years ago, and I'm so happy that now it seems that impact investing or triple bottom line businesses are now sort of more mainstream than when I started several years ago or over 20 years ago. So after that, because of my experience as a community organizer with working with farmers and fisherfolk communities, I ended up setting up an agri business. We were processing seafood for export. We're also doing some aquaculture. And by the age of 26, 27, I had like 1,000 people working for me. Majority are women in rural communities. I joke that that sort of like that experience was sort of a way to that experience was a way of preparation for getting married. When you have 1,000 women working for you, all armed with stainless steel knives, you learn, who who's the boss, right? So, but then, I decided to go to business school. I ended up going to Harvard Business School, and then that was around the time of the first internet boom, 20 years ago, and like someone, a fish farmer, an agribusiness entrepreneur from an emerging market, surrounded by investment bankers, management consultants, and really smart product managers from Silicon Valley. I decided, wow, I really got to get into this internet thing. So I ended up spending a few years in Silicon Valley. I worked for JP Morgan in their technology investment banking practice, learned a lot about finance and technologies while I was there. Then I decided to move back to the Philippines and I joined the startup. So back then, the startup was a mobile instant messaging startup, and that startup actually grew. We ended up actually having a joint venture in India with Times Internet Group, based out of Gurgaon, New Delhi. We also had operations in China, Japan, the U.S., and Indonesia as well. Uh, a few years later, I was part of the founding team of that, and the business became very profitable, and we ended up selling it to the largest mobile network in the Philippines. And with that money from that startup, I decided to start Ayannah, and I wanted Ayannah to be sort of the culmination of what everything I've learned about working with communities and helping make better communities, as well as my what I've learned about finance and what I've learned about technology, putting it together into Ayana. And I said, if there's anything that can help improve lives, it will be access to financial services. So we've really focused on on digitizing finance and commerce. Now, the thing is, I also realized one of the lessons I learned is like you just don't digitize for the sake of digitizing. So you don't want to create products that don't have no problem to solve, right? So it's really important that one of the key things is to, when I was a community organizer, we were always asked to really listen to the needs and aspirations of the communities that we work with. And interestingly enough, when I was in Silicon Valley and working with the Google folks, it's the same thing, right? They call it customer centricity, or when you do design sprints, you do a lot of like feedback with the users. So it's the same concept of customer centricity, whether in social development work, working with communities, or you're building product for a tech company. So I think that's one first lesson of leadership is begin with the customer in mind and build things that solve people's problems. So I think that's the first step as a leader and an entrepreneur. Now, so that's for me the fundamental sort of mindset is the customer centricity, or else you end up like building stuff that people don't need and there's no market. And then all of that's already been codified in this lean startup frameworks. Total addressable market. What's willingness and ability to pay, etc., etc. So all of that's already codified, but in a very short sentence, basically, you really have to find some build products that serve customers and people are willing to work and pay. So that's the first mindset. But as a leader, as an entrepreneur, I see that there are like six things that I would really try to build in myself and also expect of my team. Right now, our team is close to 70 now, and we'll probably end up becoming another 100 in the next 2 quarters. Is There's six attributes that I am expecting of myself and I'm expecting of my team members. The first one is commitment to perfection or excellence. So I think that's a very important thing. Is that that you yourself is really committed to continuous improvement, doing things better, always looking for problems to solve and to solutions that make life easier for you and for your customers. First step is commitment to perfection or excellence. Second would be a problem solving mindset. So a problem solving mindset is always like always looking for how to solve a problem rather than basically, so everything you look at. So whenever you look at something, then how do you make things better? How do you solve a problem that people have and make life better for them? Thirdly, would be being proactive. So that's the one thing that I really expect from my team, and of course myself, is to really take the initiative. Don't let things happen to you, but make things happen. So don't let circumstances dictate your the outcomes, but basically make sure that you create the circumstances for successful outcomes. So being proactive is very key. Also, thinking like a chess player, thinking 5 steps ahead. So when you're looking at a solving an opportunity, let's say you want to create an app or a product to solve a particular problem, always think about what are the sort of the feedback loops, or what are the sort of the uh, second second layer or all of sort of this causality and correlations, right? So being proactive is important. Fourth, I really believe you have to be persuasive. So that's a number one to be a successful entrepreneur and leader. Obviously, you gotta be able to convince people to do things you want them to do, right? So persuasion or the ability to make people do what you want them to do is very key. Uh, and Fifth is persistence. So, I mean, entrepreneurship and building innovative products is not for the faint hearted. If you want something very risk free or pretty much no volatility, no uncertainty, then maybe work for a legacy company. But if you're in a startup, particularly a technology startup that's pioneering something, particularly in an emerging market like the Philippines or India or Indonesia, you really have to be persistent, because sometimes you have to start even when the market's not ready, and it will take years before the market's ready. In our case, we started almost 10 years ago. It's only the past 2 years that we can probably say that, wow, we're glad we started when we did, because when the market boomed, particularly because of the pandemic, we were ready, and we had the products that served the needs of people when they most needed it. And lastly, I think what's really important in what I expect of myself and I expect of my team is passion. You really have to be passionate about what you're doing. If you're just doing it for the money, well, maybe that helps, especially when you have student loans to pay, etc. But what's really important is you really have to like what you're doing. You have to be committed, and I think if you have, if you see meaning and purpose in what you're doing, it's gonna make it easier for you to be successful at it. So these are the six things. Number one would be committing to perfection. Number two, being a problem solver for yourself and for your customers and for everybody, your investors, for your employees, etc. Thirdly, would be to be very proactive, to think like a chess player, thinking 5 steps ahead, making sure that you dictate the tempo rather than the circumstances dictating the tempo of operations. Fourth would be to be very persuasive, always be closing, as they say. Sales, I actually think I would highly encourage anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur or a leader to work in food service, work in a like a McDonald's or a fast foods as a food attendant, food server, or waiter or waitress, or work in a hotel or whatever. Anything that requires you to be a customer facing, or even better, do something in sales, because those are skills that you will learn that will help you when you become a leader or an entrepreneur. Uh, Fifth is to be persistent. Again, try and try until you die. Never accept failure, or even if you fail, learn from it and try again. And so persistence is key. And lastly, be passionate about what you're doing. And when you're passionate, it will show. It will basically create that uh, extra sort of boost to make sure that you have successful outcomes, that you succeeded with your goals. So that's my leadership talk. It's 20 minutes. We have another 10 minutes for Q&A. If people have things to ask, happy to happy to answer them. So hi, Adi. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Perez.
Hi, Vivek.
So,
Yeah, so I'm just
yeah.
waiting for if there are Q&A
Yeah, so
or
we
any.
have a question, Mr. Perez. I'll put it on
Oh,
stage.
okay. Sorry, I just saw the. Oh, okay. What made you pursue your MBA in the States, or was there already the right time for you? Uh, back then, my I actually wasn't thinking of taking my MBA anymore. So running already a successful business, but my father said, maybe it might be a good idea for one of his sons to go to Harvard Business School. So I said, okay. I was 26, 27 at the time. I took the GMAT and the TOEFL, and I decided to go. I wasn't really planning to, but in a way, I'm glad I did. Not so much from what I learned, but also from the people I met. So I met some very fantastic, amazing people, very successful, not just in business, but in anything that they do. So it was really a way for me to kind of level up. Nowadays, though, I mean, for a young professional who's just starting in their career, maybe an MBA is no longer that. Maybe it's a different time now. I mean, I think people can, if you want to become an entrepreneur, you don't necessarily have to have an MBA. If I were gonna do it again, I'd do it. But it really, if you go, let's say, well, if you're planning to do the corporate route for the first few years of your career before starting off as an entrepreneur, which actually makes a lot of sense, then maybe having an MBA is a good thing, because that kind of, it's an additional sort of data point in your resume for corporate recruiters to look at. um, but if you want to become an entrepreneur, I don't think there's anything wrong with not having an MBA. So it really is your decision. It's where you are at in your career, as well as where the world is at the time that you're thinking about taking an MBA. So maybe now, if you're in fintech, maybe now's not the right time to be taking an MBA, because things are just so hot. Uh, Maybe in the next down cycle, maybe that's a good time to take your MBA. Or maybe because of the pandemic, this might be the best time to take your MBA. So when you get out, the job market might be a little more sort of stronger to look for jobs. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Did you have any technical skills that made you successful to where you are right now? Tips for non-technical people to pursue. Oh, okay, good question. Uh, Thank you, Adi. So, well, my background, I actually, in university days, I did a little bit of software development, but very, very basic stuff. And uh, I wouldn't say that I have technical skills, but what I've been surrounded by engineers for the past 15 years. So just learning from them, I kind of understand what it takes to build product and sell product digitally because of spending so much time with engineers and product managers. So it's not something that you'll probably have to learn in school. And frankly speaking, particularly software development, computer science, and data science and digital technology is evolving so fast that even if you go to school, by the time you get out of school, what you learn is probably obsolete. Most of the time, what they're going to teach you in school is probably 5 years behind already. So it's still good, maybe if you're going to do something very technical like data science or computer science, to still have a foundation in coding principles or in data science. But I think a lot of it you'll learn on the job or when you basically just dive into a project, and that's where you learn a lot more than just book reading. And of course, there's always Google, right? If you need to learn something, there's no excuse anymore because the internet's there. All you gotta do is just type something, and then you get an answer in the internet. Uh, yeah. Uh, what do you think the next trends in the fintech world, especially to emerging countries in the ASEAN? Do they have the enough laws and capability to adapt to the new? I actually think that in many ways, emerging markets are evolving much faster than some developed markets. Do you know Japan is still very much a cash economy? And then in the US, they're still the interbank clearing is still very much antiquated. So to a certain extent, because we're leapfrogging, we don't have a lot of legacy infrastructure that leads to what I call technology dead ends or switching costs. In a way, we can just go straight to mobile, right? So in a way, that's what's happening in emerging markets. And so I think that's why I think the fintech industry is so hot right now, is because um, I mean, it's happening very fast, and COVID just accelerated everything. It's amazing what's happening in just the past 18 months. Even our business has grown like 8, 10x in 12 months because of the pandemic. So yeah, so I think the trends, what are the trends? So, well, of course, infrastructure is always an issue. Once the basic infrastructure is ready, then I think things will happen much faster. Now, there's certain things that I think are the minimum. So there's regulatory, infrastructure, and also culture. These are three things. Regulatory, obviously. The nice thing is many of the monetary authorities around the world are actually just exchanging notes. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, all the monetary authorities around Southeast Asia were part of this thing called the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And I'm sure we also interact with the Reserve Bank of India, etc. And so the regulators are also trying their best to stay to keep pace with the rapid changes in technology. So far, we have no problems with the regulators. At least at the senior level, they're all very open and they all realize that technology could really make financial services more accessible and affordable. Uh, Infrastructure is the next leg. So, of course, you got all the mobile data networks have to be better, particularly in the Philippines, where we're an archipelago. We need more cellular coverage to make sure we reach the most remotest parts of the Philippines. But for the most part, in the urban areas, the infrastructure is already adequate. Lastly, and I think this is probably the one that is the trickiest or the most challenging, would be culture. Again, I think regulatory infrastructure, regulatory framework, and then you got the culture. People have to start learning to trust using apps rather than doing face-to-face transactions, and that takes time, especially when things are evolving in an uneven way, right? So, for example, in the Philippines, it's only now we're doing mobile number portability. It's only now that we're implementing a national ID. I think in India it's already been done. In India, there's already Aadhaar, so which we are just about to start here. There's already in India. There's already UPI, which we're just about to start here. So all of these infrastructure and regulatory improvements are going to set the objective conditions for adoption of digital. But then the key now is to make sure that we get the people's behavior to change, and that's the one that takes time, and that's where you need user experience and customer eccentricity. Thank you, Adi. You've been asking all the questions. Happy to chat with you offline as well. If you want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn. I think we're done, no? It's 11 o'clock. Okay.
Uh, yes, yes, we have crossed our session time. So, do you want me to conclude, Mr. Perez?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Perez, for sharing your thoughts and probably sharing your entire journey, sharing your insights about Philippines, how the fintech scenario is out there. Thank you so much for taking out time and for participating in this event. On that note, I would also like to thank Razorpay, Amazon Pay, WhatsApp, in association with Google Pay, Open Financial Technologies, our digital payments partner, Cash Free Payments. Thank you, Mr. Perez, and thank you everyone for taking out time and attending the session. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.